Hi, my name is Ramon Kubicek. I'm an artist from the West Coast, Canada, and also based in Montreal. I'd like to invite you to a presentation of some of my paintings for ZoomMuse coming up Monday, May 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So for today, I've brought along 4 paintings to give you an idea of what my work is about. The first of them is called Migration. It's 36 inches by 48 inches on canvas. I guess kind of mixed media. It's acrylic, oil stick, and pen. And what it represents is a sense of evolution. In other words, the idea that all living forms are in transition. So I speak to that in this painting. That's my feeling. And I get that from just the experience of being on beaches, which are that liminal space where you see things under the influence of all the elements, the sun, obviously the water, the earth, all of those things. And the constant movement of the waves. And based on that experience, I get the feeling that things are moving, altering, and what then prompts us is what stays permanent in that. Only I guess the viewer to some extent, and to what extent is up to us. The second painting is called Raising the Sparks. As you can see, I'm in a sense a colorist. All my colors are quite intense. This one is 36 inches square on canvas. And again, basically acrylic, oil stick, and pen. This comes out of a sense of traditions that everything is invested with, I guess, life energy, spiritual energy. And it comes specifically from the Kabbalah, that I guess Jewish spiritual tradition, which says that going back to the Big Bang, the origin of all creation, where things sped out at the speed of light. And it points out that when we had the Big Bang, that was the only time there was true perfection. And after that, when the Big Bang occurred and movement throughout, I guess, the universe was created, part of that whole process was imperfection. So if we fast forward to where we are today, the Kabbalists say that everything has light within it, but it is trapped, and it is trapped with imperfection. We have light and we have imperfection. So the Kabbalist, i.e. every human being, can, through simply living rightly and with correct intention, release the sparks, the original sparks of creation, to go back to their origin. And so that means, I love that idea, because it means simply that as we greet the day in our ordinary life, we don't do anything extraordinary. We greet the day in our ordinary life. And if we have the intention that everything that we look at, everything that we engage with has sparks of original divine energy in them, we help release them to go back to its origin if we're in the right state. The next painting is Le Soleil Noir, the dark sun. And this is part of a whole series. Likewise, the earlier painting was part of a whole series of paintings on raising the sparks. And this one, part of a whole series called the Black Sun series. And this one is 26 inches square. And this comes out of a poem by the French Romantic poet Gérard de Nerval, who had struggled with mental illness throughout his life and was known for all kinds of extraordinary poses and both literal and figurative. And he wrote about the gifts that melancholy could bring. So I took to this and I said, well, not taking the contemporary view of depression as a clinical illness, which it is, but taking the kind of softer edge of that. Melancholy is showing us some of the aspects of existence that bring other things out in relief. I thought I would have a series of paintings that have to do with that, which would then allow me to bring in different ranges of meaning. I often work with multiple ranges of meaning. So one is, what does melancholy bring? The second is alchemical, the whole idea of the stage of what's called nigredo, which is the stage where the alchemist, or the process of creation, where that is at, dives into, I guess what you might call the lowest of the low, the depths of being, the necessary descent into earth before it can ascend into whiteness and eventually through grace into the gold, or what we might call the transformation. So the nigredo is not something we can skip. We all have to, if we wish to complete the process, if we wish to be transformed, we all have to go into an embrace matter. So it's the embrace of matter. But at the same time, I'm in some way acknowledging the fact that we live in difficult times. And part of that is the acknowledgement that we're surrounded by signs of an apocalypse. I'm not talking about anything truly extraordinary. It's something that we see all around us, signs of difficulty. And so for me, that is symbolized by the black sun. The sun is something we take for granted. And so that's part of that. But by the way, none of these things should get in the way. Things that I'm saying should get in the way of viewing the painting. I try to create paintings in such a way so that anyone looking at this can see it just as hopefully an attractive arrangement of paint. They don't have to start seeing, I don't see the nigredo. Well, that's fine. But if you see it as something that is attractive in and of itself, then I think the painting is successful and that it communicates. And the next painting, it's called Cloth of Many Colors. And this is, I do a few what we might call wholly narrative paintings. So what that means is that I put together a story, but it's not a conventional story because I only give you some of the elements and you, the viewer, have to complete the story yourself. And there's not a particular story. You create it of its own self. So there's nothing to know other than what you see. A large cloth, in a sense, given the relative size of the humans, impossibly large. What is it doing there? And you can see that the people themselves have varying reactions to it. So it's a puzzle. It's a bit of a puzzle piece. There's perhaps the only creature that's unperturbed by it is the bird that's on the wire. And in the deep background are some tanks going off to war. And that's basically it. Simple piece. There's someone taking a selfie with it. Some people seem to be in ecstasy. Other people are bored. That's my piece called Cloth of Many Colors. And that's basically it as far as the 4 paintings go. I've got many more, and they will probably fall into one of those categories.
I've looked at your website and I must say I'm incredibly impressed. Do you plan this, do the ideas for these come to you ahead of time? Or when you sit down in front of the canvas and you've got your materials and so on, then are you intent, does it pop into your head at that point? How do you decide what you're actually doing? What's your process?
Well, my mind has images constantly. I'm always there. So they just come to me, various images, but they don't necessarily come to me as fully formed paintings. They're, parts of possibly what might be construed as a painting or might even be construed as part of a short film or whatnot. Sometimes I have ideas, sometimes some kind of poetic line comes to me and so forth. So I work in a couple of different ways. Some occasionally I will just have the blank canvas and I start and see what emerges. Other times I have an idea of what I want to do, and I proceed to do it, and it never gets there. You know, it's like heading for Calgary and you end up in New Mexico or someplace. It's something akin to that. But there are paintings, I work on several at the same time. So I don't allow myself, I'm lucky enough to have a large studio in Gibsons, where, well, not Gibsons, Roberts Creek rather, but I live in Gibsons on the Sunshine Coast and in Roberts Creek. And so I can actually have these paintings up against the wall, and I get to a certain point and often I get stuck. Now, usually what a lot of people do, artists do, is they spend a lot of time looking at a painting because it's in that engagement with the paint, the canvas and so forth, that some solution comes. But some circumstances for me often don't allow that. So what happens is, if I get to a certain point, rather than force the issue, I'll put it to one side and I start another one and then another one. And often I might have as many as 4 or 5, but I have at the same time, but I have actually gone back to a painting 6, 7, 8 months later and found the solution. I said, okay, this is what I have to do. And I've done it, and that's worked out. Sometimes I have projects going, series going. So we talked about raising the sparks, and we talked about the Black Sun series. So I've got 6, 7 paintings under each series. That works purely visually. It does not work as a something like, well, I'm going to do this or that. I can talk about it as if it's entirely intellectual, but when I go into the studio, as soon as I'm through that door, I go in with blank mind, empty mind completely, and I just know intuitively. So I work purely intuitively. I don't necessarily work all in the same series at the same time, but so if you're talking about the occasions where I am working just on, for example, Black Sun series, well, then if I have 3 Black Sun paintings going, then clearly I'm at somewhere in the canvases, I'm going to have 3 Black Suns, right? That way. But I want to make sure that it doesn't become static. So I give myself the task of saying, okay, somewhere here, there's going to be a Black Sun. And then I have to just try to feel out what, if I've done one, for instance, I did the one that I presented, and I said, okay, what was the next one? So I've already got 4 or 5 of them. And I thought, well, I'm going to do it under different circumstances. So I decided, I had the idea that of boats on water, heading and trying to find a new Indies. I call it looking for a new Indies. And I have a statue of Columbus pointing. So on one of the boats, and he's looking for a new Indies, not the West Indies that he discovered, but some new Indies. And there's a Black Sun overhead, but beneath the Black Sun, beautiful blue skies, blue sea, and so forth. And the boats are more like sailboats and so forth. So I'm connecting different ideas together. Certainly there's no sense of melancholy, for example. There's something else entirely at work there. And it's just something that came to me. And when I was looking at the canvas, I wanted to work with some turquoise and so forth. And that's what came. Just that decision to engage with the color. I said, okay, how about I put it over water? How about if I do this or that? And the ideas come very quickly. But sometimes, of course, one has to fall back on other things. For example, I'm now working in collaboration with a poet, Adelia McWilliam. And it's what we call the Terra Poetic series, which is kind of ecological art and poetry. So sometimes I'll put something together, and she will write a poem, and we have a kind of dialogue. We're in the process of creating a website about that, more about that when the actual ZoomMuse presentation comes along on May 17th. But other times, there's a poem that she says, well, I'd like you to do something about that. Now, for me, that's difficult because it's a lot more intellectual. And so I have to create something that's more conceptual. So I've just posted a painting which is about the, I guess, the destruction of Chinatown in a small town called Cumberland in British Columbia. I mean, who would think that a tiny town would have a Chinatown? It did. And there was a fire, and then it collapsed into a lake, and so forth. So for me, I couldn't do it. And also I'd never visited it as such. I just had the poem to go by. I couldn't do it as one event. So I structured the canvas in such a way so that I had 3 or 4 so-called different frames or zones happening simultaneously. And what they represented was, of course, moments in time, where you could see, so to speak, the building sinking into the water, and another one where you see trees, another one where you see fire in the background, and so forth. Even though as one entire picture, that would not exist in nature. But as an experience, we can certainly understand that exists because our minds are capable of holding all these different experiences together. So that's, that's another way that I work as well.
I don't know if this was your bio or artist statement, but it's a piece of text from your website where you say that natural patterns and archetypal or archetypical forms surround us in the same way that waking and dreaming commingle. Those are encompassing statements. How do you get your inspiration? Are there particular activities that, like going out for a walk around the block?
I think research for me would be going through nature, but also could be going down alleyways. Alleyways are really rich repositories of impressions. So I can get a lot of ideas there. And walking is something that often stimulates ideas. So that's simply what I do. To some extent, I have to work every day. Even if I'm away, if I'm not able to paint or draw, I can at least write ideas down. I keep an idea book going all the time. And there's some aspect of my mind that's always, some back room in my mind where ideas are always churning out, and I'm putting things together and so forth. So when I talk about the natural patterns in nature, that goes back, that's something that's been with me forever, even when I was a very small child. I was sick quite a few times, so I was stuck in bed. So basically, I had nothing to do. I ran through reading all the books, and I'd look at cracks in the wall, or I'd look at the natural pattern, the patterns in curtains, or if I could look out and see the trees, the patterns in the leaves, and so forth. So at a very young age, 7, 8, 9, and so forth, I was fascinated by patterning. And that little bit later on, and I mean just a bit later on, when I was like my very early teens, became an acknowledgement that really what was important to me, perhaps useless in life, but important to me, was the discovery of the process of the invisible becoming visible through things like patterns or openings. And, that's really what started the engagement. At that point, at the age of 14, I didn't know whether I wanted to be an artist, a writer, or a filmmaker. I said, can't one be all 3 things at the same time? I almost didn't become any. So, but patterning was what really got me going.
Are there particular artists that you have been inspired or have learned from, or
Mhm.
however you'd phrase that?
That's a good question. It's not a trite question at all, but it's a difficult one for me because there are artists from every, period that I admire and that I could say have influenced me to some extent. And often it depends on what the season of the year is, and how I respond to art, or what my aesthetic preoccupations are at a particular time. Whether, for instance, if I'm working with texture or whatnot, what is it? What's happening? So, if I'm interested in mark making, calligraphy, then there are lots of artists that I like. People like Mark Tobey, Mark Rothko is different again, fields of color. Jack Wise, who was a Canadian painter, I aspired to. And I really liked about Jack Wise was that he believed that every paint stroke, he in some way connected himself to the ancient Chinese and Japanese painters, and he said that and then afterwards other people like Roy Kayuka also said that every mark that you make is dependent on the state you're in. And Roy Kayuka put it this way: he said, nothing that you create can be better than the state of the artist who created it. So you have to really, make sure that you're in that space. Jack Wise used to believe that you could tell which lines of a painting were throwaway lines and which were done consciously. So that sense I aspire to, but not everyone works with a brush, and so that doesn't necessarily work, except as a reminder that the space that you're in has to be open. So I admire that, that attitude very much. But it's hard for me at this moment to think of a specific artist. There's always, the obvious greats like Rembrandt and Dürer and so forth and so forth, Botticelli, but I'm afraid I can't tell you exactly who, what artist. It would have to be like, I'd have to get back to you with a list of 30 or 40, with that. Yeah, I think an exciting time would have been Europe in the 1890s, something like that. There was a lot, all the modernisms of art, literature, design, music, they were all surging forward, and people could still get away with wearing capes outside, be very fanciful, be shocking and have a reaction. Now, no one's shocked by things like that. So anyway, that's probably a safe answer. So once again, I'd like to invite you to my presentation on art, May 17th, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. See you then.